My name is Andy Peart. I look after the marketing and strategy for Artificial Solutions. As a company, like many actually here in this conference, we focus on a form of AI that's referred to as conversational AI. Basically, it allows people to speak to technology, to devices, to a wide range of different channels indeed, in a very human-like, intelligent and conversational way. And I think that conversational bit is absolutely crucial. We've chosen to approach this kind of rather thorny technological issue in a slightly different way than certainly many, in as much as we've built a platform. It's a platform that's called Teneo, and it allows non-specialists, so you don't need to be a pointy-head computational linguist. Sorry, are there any computational linguists in the room? Well, sorry about that. So you don't need to have that level of skill to use Teneo. And once you've built a conversational system, you can deploy it in multiple languages. Indeed, we support 35 different languages and across multiple channels, platforms, and modes of input. And there's a further element that's probably just worth mentioning, and that's to do with the data. Because when we speak as humans, you reveal an awful lot about what you're thinking, your likes, your dislikes, what you're thinking about, what your sentiment is. And if you can capture this data in all its contextual glory, you can really start to think what your users are, or understand what your users are thinking. And you can use it to better inform product and service development. And of course, you can use it in a closed loop system to start to improve the capability of your conversational system. So in short, that's who we are as a company. But back to the theme at hand, what's going to happen as far as AI is concerned. I smiled. I was doing a little bit of research, and this was one of the headlines that was in the English press recently. And I just love the emotive language that's used about this whole subject, Robot warning, shock report, millions of jobs at risk, 75 million jobs to be forced out by 2022. Oh my word. Now, and actually they claim this was from the World Economic Forum. If you actually digged a little bit deeper, it actually is a little bit more revealing, because it actually says, well, yes, there are estimates that say 75 million jobs could be at risk, could be displaced, but they also estimate that 133 million additional jobs would be created. So 50 plus million jobs created. It just doesn't make the headlines. And I think this is something that all of us are kind of guilty of in this sensationalism of what's going on. A little bit of fake news, I think. It's interesting that in the US you've got Trump, in the UK we've got Brexit to worry about. That's quite divisive. Is all of this change, going to drive, reductions in jobs as far as automation is concerned? Well, it might seem obvious that, if you automate a task, it's actually going to reduce the amount of people that are needed within a company. But that kind of ignores a really rather important principle of economics, and that is that if you automate, you tend to drive down costs. And if you drive down costs, you tend to stimulate sales, and that tends to increase jobs rather than decrease them. But without doubt, the profile of jobs is changing. And I think that's going to be the key message, through this presentation and over the next few years. So, if you look back, can the past predict what's going to be happening in the future? Well, it's pretty clear that over the last sort of 200 years, we've not all lost our jobs. In actual fact, the proportion of people in work to the overall population has improved. It's increased. There's more people in work. So, the pointers are moving in the right direction. But, of course, the critics would say, well, AI is different. It's going to change things. And it will change things. It will change the profile of the role. This is an interesting chart. It points to what happened, well, about 30 years ago now, in 1986. In fact, there was a big series of strikes in the UK, in Wapping, and it was all to do with newsprint and typesetting when Murdoch wanted to introduce modern technologies and it was blowing out the typesetters. And this chart kind of indicates, you've got the fact that the number of jobs in typesetting is decreasing, and yet the number of jobs in creative graphic design is increasing. So it shows that the net change in terms of jobs is increasing, but the profile of them is changing. And there's another kind of ethical issue. This change is likely to impact on the developing world more than it does on us in the Western world. The sort of jobs that are likely to be impacted are those that tend to be repetitive, that are rules-based, that can easily be automated. Whilst not a subject for this particular conference, many events that I go to, RPA, robotic process automation, is a big subject. And this is classic on picking on specific areas of a business that you can easily automate, the rules-based repetitive tasks. Now, these are the sort of tasks that traditionally have been outsourced to the developing world. Now, it's likely that with changes in AI, it's going to have a much more dramatic effect in terms of the jobs in developing world than it does in the Western world, which is an interesting observation. So how do you size what's going on? How can you work out, what is going to be the change within an organisation? This is a subject that's been worrying executives for a number of years now. And it's almost impossible to put a number on that. I would hazard as much to say that it's a fool's errand. Indeed, there was a report recently by PwC trying to look at this, and it was not that helpful. Basically, they were saying that it's likely that there could be a 3% reduction in jobs due to AI in the next 5 years, but that could change by up to 30%. So, where are you? What's going on? Certainly, if you ask executives in this same study by PwC, twice as many executives, 39%, were saying they felt that there would actually be an increase in the number of jobs because of AI versus 19% that thought there would be a reduction. So if you take what executives are thinking and planning for at the moment, well, it's pointing in the right direction to an increase in jobs. Interestingly, they also said that the biggest challenge that they have, 31% identified this, is actually filling the new jobs that are being created by AI. It's a major issue. And actually, this is a theme that also runs through. I met up with IDC a couple of weeks ago, and they shared a report that they'd recently done into CIOs, and their number one challenge was recruiting and then training up people to take advantage of the new jobs that are being created. But it's certainly a prize worth shooting for. Again, this same report estimates that $15.7 trillion could be created globally by 2030 on the back of these changes in AI. So where are we as far as what's happening with AI is concerned? You've probably seen this quote. It's quite a famous quote by Andrew Ng. It's actually a few years old now. It's dating back about 3-4 years now. But he was saying that, look, if a typical person can do a mental task in less than 1 second of thought, it can probably be automated using AI, now or in the near future. So, for example, things like facial recognition. We can look around, we can just recognize people without thinking. And if you look at what Facebook are doing now with facial recognition, it's pretty good, albeit there are lots of examples of where it doesn't quite work. But that's an example of where AI is really able to make a difference and to focus in a very small area. But even in those kind of environments, it doesn't really understand. It's not sentiment at this moment. So again, a very famous sort of example to illustrates the power of AI, where AlphaGo beat the #1 Go player in 2016. But even then, the algorithm, the AI, didn't understand that AlphaGo is a game. It doesn't have knowledge of what's going on at this moment. I picked this, it's quite a nice example of where actually things can go wrong. This is an example of Amazon Alexa. I don't know if you've read about this, but a 6-year-old girl, Brooke Nitzel, worked out that she could actually order things just by asking over Alexa. And she ordered a $160 doll's house and 4 pounds of cookies on her mum's Alexa. And it was delivered. The parents sort of found out, worked out what had happened, changed the parental rules on Alexa, and gave the doll's house to a children's hospital. But the story doesn't end there. This happened in San Diego, and a news channel, CW6, actually reported on it. And the lead anchorman was saying, it's great, you know, you just need to ask Alexa, buy me a doll's house, and it works. And apparently, the story goes that it triggered Alexa in an undisclosed number of houses, and additional doll's houses were bought. So again, it kind of illustrates that what can happen at this moment where things are not quite as controlled as you would expect them to be. So, where can we win out? Where can we make a difference? Well, humans have a real advantage, and that's to do with empathy, with emotion, with understanding humour. Indeed, I think it's these sort of soft skills that are really going to make a difference. And indeed, common sense. Now, AI can actually mimic things quite successfully, and you know, we were talking about what do we mean by a conversational system. I've got a video that I'd like to illustrate what can happen with conversational systems. There's a little bit of a health warning with this, and I would like your input. The nice thing is, it's not a company video, okay? So we've seen throughout this conference very nice videos where I'd like to buy some insurance. Yes, sir. What would you like? Oh, I'd like to spend $5,000. Okay, let me order it for you. In the real world, it doesn't quite work like that. The video I'm about to show, if you let me, is not like that. And this kind of illustrates what it's going to be like, I think. It's nothing to do with us other than it's using something that we created. It's amazing that people actually video themselves and place videos on YouTube of them talking to a virtual assistant in the way that this guy talks to a virtual assistant. We've tried to edit a little bit, but there's still some quite sensitive language in there. Is this okay? It's a little bit sexist, I'm afraid. But the nice bit is at the end, where I would argue that the VA wins out. Okay? It's it's a little bit spicy.
Good evening. What is your name?
I'm Indigo, and I'm here to answer your questions.
If you think you're so smart, what's the distance to the moon?
226,366 miles.
Shut the fuck up. How'd you figure that so quickly? I'm curious about your bra size.
Everyone has different sides to their character.
Oh, come on. What size bra do you wear?
You seem to assume I am female, that I have human form, and that this is an appropriate question to ask a woman. You are wrong on all counts.
Oh my God, Siri wasn't a virgin, and I love her.
Yeah, OMG just about covers it.
You suck.
It seems I've made a bad impression on you. I'm sorry, I'm doing my best to help.
In about 5 minutes, I'm going to delete your ass.
I don't think so.
I f***ing hate you.
There's only a thin line between love and hate.
You're fat and ugly, too.
Perhaps it's lucky for you that I am not commenting on your appearance.
So, sorry, apologies again. I know that's a little bit kind of PC incorrect, but I thought it was nice to see you know, even though I'm kind of playing down what AI can do, already it's, you know, it's doing pretty well. It can go quite a long way. And I just love the way that at the very end, you know, I felt anyway that the VA really put this guy in his place. There's some other really, really horrible videos on YouTube of people talking to VAs. It's very strange. Look, we're talking about conversational AI. I'm not going to go into loads of detail now, but you might be thinking, well, hang on, it's quite easy to build these kind of systems. Well, I can assure you it isn't. And that's because language itself is really rather complex. This actually is an image of a language. It's within our Teneo platform. We have a module that's called the Teneo Language Resources. We've actually used machine learning to look at over 1 billion conversations that we've gathered over the last decade and to map out the relationships between words, synonyms, sentences, meanings. And this is one of the 35 languages. And this is what a language looks like. And the reason I show it there is just to illustrate this is why building really conversational systems is complex. Think about trying to build that, map that. Really, the only way that you can do that is by using elements of machine learning in the process. So how you actually build systems has been the subject of, you know, so many presentations, so I'm not going to go there. But what I did want to do is talk a little bit about how conversational AI is actually being used in real live examples, and is it actually replacing humans, or is it adding a different dimension? And I've got 5 examples that I'd like to chat through and look at it from maybe a slightly different angle by looking at some of the business drivers behind them. The first example that I'd like to talk about is Shell. We're working with one of the divisions within Shell, which is the lubrications division, which actually is the largest division within Shell. And the business driver for the eventual conversational system came right from the CEO of the lubrications division. And what he set as a strategy was, what we want to do is really position the company around total cost of ownership. The argument that if you put the right lubricant in, it's going to be 3 to 4% of your overall sort of operational budget, but you're going to save between 30 and 40% in your overall lifetime cost by getting the right lubricant. So you might then be thinking, well, how complicated can oil actually be? Well, it turns out it can be quite complicated, because Shell have over 3,000 different product lines. They have 2,000 obsolete products. They have 31,000 competitor products. They need to know what oil goes in over 1 million different engine types. They have 100,000 different data sheets. They operate in 80 different countries across multiple languages. And of course, each country has different legal obligations as well. So when they give a recommendation, they want to say, whoa, and it's not really our fault if we get it wrong. So here's our legal disclaimer. So there's so many different elements that go into that. But this is kind of the sort of thing that is good for computers to work out. Also, what Shell are wanting to do, is position themselves as being a real innovator in the petrochem industry. They're wanting to be seen as a leader in AI. And one of the projects, we're just one of many projects that they're working on, but one of the projects to do this, and the nice thing is it's the face of AI, was to build a virtual assistant, a voice-based virtual assistant, that will actually advise their distributors in 80 different countries on what particular oil goes into an engine type. And it gets quite complicated because, of course, the product names are slightly complex. They're not obvious words, so you need to take into account all of these sorts of issues. Now, Shell actually imaginatively called it Lube Chat. What a wonderful name for their virtual assistant. But some of the stats up there are quite interesting. The approval ratings are quite high. They're getting a 98% approval rating. But the middle stat, I think, is quite important. They're actually seeing a 40% reduction in live call volume through to their agents. Now, Shell have verbally told us that it can cost up to $700, which seems inconceivable to me, but to actually identify which particular oil goes into a certain engine type. And I think that's because of the complexities behind. So this is not just a straightforward task in some cases. So you can see that the savings could be quite significant on a system like this. Another example is actually with Skoda. Now this is an interesting one. What they were wanting to do is look at the customer journey. And being an automaker, they know stats at every stage of the journey. So they know that if you or I go to their website, we're clearly looking for something, we're more likely to end up buying, ultimately buying a car. If they can get us through to the car configurator to pick the particular model that we're looking for and to build it up, again, you're more likely to buy. The real holy grail in this journey is to get you to a dealership to test drive. So what Lucy actually does is help take you on this journey by talking to you. So it will ask, hi Andy, what are you looking for? Don't really know. Tell me a bit about you. Well, I've got 2 kids, a dog, I like windsurfing. What you need is. So it will then take me through to the configurator. Once I've configured the car, it will then say, would you like to test drive? Yeah, okay. And it will actually look through their dealer network and find a dealership that's closest to me that has a car that's relatively similar to the one that I've configured. And the nice thing is with this is they've seen a 400% improvement in terms of conversion rate across that stage of the customer journey. So again, a nice example. And as far as the impact on the workforce, this is doing something completely different that they would be able to do with their existing workforce. So it's not impacting on the job market. Another example is with AT&T. So AT&T obviously work in many different areas. The particular area in which we're working is their digital life. And this is all around home security and automation. And what they were wanting to do was build a conversational UI to deliver differentiation and make the system much easier to use. They were finding that to set the complex rules that are possible within digital life. So we're talking about things like, when I'm 2 miles away from Brian's home, open the security gates, put the lights on in the mansion, notify the butler, and make sure the dog's fed.
I have a security gate?
You do indeed. And to set that using GUI was almost impossible for users. In fact, when they did a comparison of a GUI interface versus a speech interface, only 1/3 of people were able to set a rule within the 3-minute timescale versus 100% of people who were able to achieve the same thing using voice. Why did AT&T do this? Well, partly for usability and partly for differentiation. They wanted to look at differentiating themselves and do something different. Interestingly, what they've gone on to do is actually build a more typical virtual assistant on the back of this to help answer queries, and indeed they now rely almost exclusively on the virtual assistant to do that. In fact, nice little quote, they position it as being better than a human in terms of the level of service they provide. But why could it do this? Well, because it's working within a certain domain. It knows exactly about the digital life queries, and it continues to improve as time goes by with more questions that are asked of it. This is an interesting example. Kindred is possibly not a company that you would know. It's not well known in the US, but it's an online betting company. It's pretty big in Europe. It has 13 million customers. It's actually the second largest betting company in Europe. And what they wanted to do was position themselves as been a real innovator in the market. It's kind of part of their DNA. It's the whole sort of ethics of their company. And indeed, they have an innovation department solely set up to identify new areas of innovation. And one of the areas that they had identified was to use voice to target people like me, who, to be honest, has never really placed a bet in his life. You know, the thought of going into a betting shop is just alien to me. Even going onto a betting site, no way. But I could imagine that, you know, maybe I want to place a bet that Brexit eventually will be settled. That would be nice, wouldn't it? And I want an app to be able to understand what I'm saying in my own terminology and take me on a journey and then potentially upsell, and for me to be able to ask questions of it, you know, if I don't understand something. So that's exactly what they built. And the primary motivation behind that was to strengthen their innovation positioning. But on the back of that, they did some research, and hence that top stat is really important. This is the company's stats, not mine. 94% of people thought that the new app positioned Kindred as being an innovative company. So it met their KPIs. And the final example that I wanted to kind of talk about, again in this sort of innovation field, is with an online bank called Widiba. It's actually the online subsidiary of MPS. MPS is the world's oldest bank. It's an Italian bank. And they wanted again to be positioned as an innovative leader in the banking sector. So initially we worked with them in the online banking space. They did, I guess, quite an interesting idea. They did crowdsourcing for ideas on how you wanted to set up an online bank. One of the things that they came up with that people suggested was, well, why do I have to have the account number that you pick? Why can't I choose my own account number? So this made actually setting up an account slightly more difficult, and they wanted an automated capability to do that, and the obvious thing was to build a virtual assistant, which is exactly what they did. Then behind authentication, they extended the virtual assistant to do things like check bank balance and transfer money. Interestingly, they called their virtual assistant Widi, after their company called Widiba. It's strange what people sometimes call their VAs. But the interesting bit really follows on where last year they actually launched what they positioned as the world's first virtual reality bank. Now, you might question how many people actually want to put on a VR headset to actually check their bank balance. But if you did want to, well, you could go to Widiba and you could do that in Italian. And the speaky bit of it was built with the conversational AI platform. So the reason for going through these examples is an illustration that the impact, in my opinion, of AI on jobs isn't the obvious conclusion that it's going to destroy jobs. I actually think that it's going to open up many new opportunities. So in summary, into that question again, you know, will AI replace humans in customer engagement? Well, I would argue no. I would argue that the soft skills that humans can offer will differentiate us, will make sure that we still have a role in this. It will definitely, AI will definitely change the nature of role and will very much promote the softer skills. So that's really what I wanted to cover in this presentation. And yeah, we've got time for any questions if you had any. Yes, please. I strongly think that voice-based assistants are the future. I think increasingly all of us as humans expect to be able to speak to devices and for them to understand us. It's going to become like touchscreens are now. You know, you just expect to be able to touch. And I think that the next step is going to be voice. I think it will be part of a combined interface. So I do think that voice assistants are going to become a key part of every enterprise's interface with their customers. And furthermore, I think the data that you can capture is going to help really differentiate and provide a real advantage to you as an organization, which does introduce an interesting angle around data privacy and security and GDPR, which I'd be happy to go into if anybody wants to cover that. Brian.
Yeah, so now that clearly companies like yours are in a position where they can deliver a successful AI product.
Yes.
And it's not in the future, you can actually deliver it now. Do you see your company moving towards even more natural, almost uncanny type speech? The keynote, the first day, the responding text-to-speech said, and things that were definitely trying to imitate a human. Is the company's product in that direction?
We're definitely moving into a much more conversational capability, but our research and indeed widely recognized industry guidelines are that you should be very upfront about when we as humans are speaking to an automated capability. Indeed, we've fallen foul of it with an implementation that we did with, well, I won't name them, but you can probably guess, the #1 telco in Switzerland that has something like Swiss telco in their name. And initially, we put a virtual assistant in front of their live chat capability to act as the initial interface. People, when it worked, it was fine. If there was a problem with it, and then people suddenly realized that they were talking to an automated capability, they got very unhappy. When it was revealed up front that they were talking to a robot, the satisfaction rates went up much higher. So my personal belief is that in certainly the domains that we're targeting, and the advantage we've got, we're not like Google or Apple with Siri or Microsoft with Cortana that are trying to do everything for everybody. We're focusing on a certain domain for a certain company, which means that we can give a real depth of expertise and can control the experience and the interface. And I would say that you have to always reveal that you're talking to an automated one.
That's the way you and I were brought up in the industry, but it seems like the newer people in the industry think that's not the right way to go.
Maybe. Certainly, we did some independent research, actually, and the research was primarily looking at the usage of voice assistants and how that's changing, but we also asked how people would react if they were kind of tricked, if they suddenly found out they were talking to an automated capability halfway through the conversation, and 90% of people said they want full disclosure up front. So, we've got kind of stats that back up that story as well. Bill.
Yeah, along those lines, I noticed that some of your examples they gave their bots names. When you come to a customer service center, do you ever encourage your customers to say, "Hi, this is Joe, your automated system," or give it a name and essentially admit that it's a robot up front?
Yeah, it's a bit of a changing situation at the moment. Certainly, if you go back even 2 or 3 years, everybody would, a key part of the implementation would be, okay, let's build a persona for our virtual assistant. We worked with Telenor, and they built Anna, she was a ski instructor that knew the age. She even had an employee identification number. It was ridiculous the amount of effort that they put into building the persona, let alone what it could do. I think nowadays we are encouraging actually enterprises to be much less avatar-based and hence kind of personality-based in the way you've described. What I would say is it's important when you are building an assistant like this to think about the personality of your assistant so that it reflects your brand. A bit of an English take on this, I'm afraid, but I tend to fly British Airways across the Atlantic, but I could equally well fly Virgin. They do exactly the same thing on the same kind of planes and everything, but their personalities are a world apart, and you wouldn't want a generic VA that ostensibly answers exactly the same questions but has the same personality. The whole difference is in terms of the branding of Virgin.
So what have you got against Virgin?
Which I would say is so much cooler, so much better. Please.
TTS, what's your thinking about human-like TTS, and who's leading the race?
We as a company are ASR and TTS agnostic, so we will work with a range of different providers and support our clients in terms of what we believe is the best solution. As far as TTS is concerned, I think it's really very important to get a good human-like response, and it is getting so much better. In terms of specific providers, I can't really recommend one or the other.
Who do you guys work with? Or?
We work with a range of companies. In that case, thank you.